This was an iconic clip for Rory McIlroy. But honestly, me and my wife look like this every night after the kids go to bed. And you know who else is going to look like this in the future? Bitcoiners. When Bitcoin's price hits $1 million, $3 million, $43 million a coin, Bitcoin's going to hit the grand slam of store of value, currency, medium of exchange, and monetary network. Like Rory, who's been a phenom since he was a teen, the signs have been there all along.
Do you have a personal goal for the number of Bitcoin that the United States could have? I've heard 1 million thrown out there as a nice big round number.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of different senators and other folks on the Hill talk about specific numbers, but, I'd like it to be infinite. I want as much as we can possibly accumulate. And the reality is, I've told many people this, and especially journalists, is they say, well, is there an exact number? Well, no, not really, because, that's like saying how much gold do you want as a country? Anything else with intrinsic stored value, you want as much as you can possibly accumulate, and that's no different with Bitcoin.
Today, I'm going to walk you through the perspective of where Bitcoin's headed from the White House, from State House representatives, from analysts, from institutional investors. Some say that Bitcoin's going to hit $1 million a coin. Some $3 million a coin. Some $43 million a coin.
What is the implied purchasing power of one Bitcoin in today's purchasing power terms against, say, today's balance sheet?
$43 million.
And some will say this.
And I think just with what he did with Bitcoin in the last week is amazing. I think his willingness, and don't forget, he choreographed this. Yeah. On the campaign trail, he said this was an issue that it was important to him, and now he's followed through. And I think what you're going to start seeing is the steps for him to continue to push the limit on the Bitcoin strategic reserve at the federal level, and here at the state level. Like I said, now potentially up to 10% of our investments could be invested into Bitcoin, and I think the sky is the limit. And it establishes Bitcoin as, for all those people that started early on this process, right, ridiculed, and now to come to the point to where it's going to be a strategic, not only accepted, but it will be a strategic reserve of the United States and an investment in the second largest state in the country, like Florida. It's come full circle. The sky is the limit for Bitcoin is how I feel where Bitcoin's going. And it's I'm just glad and thankful to be a part of it. I'm glad that I was able to provide the opportunity with that original blockchain task force 4 years ago, and I think this is another supplemental effort that we're going to absolutely crush it for the state of Florida and for everybody that lives here.
You can make your own decisions. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Let's go.
$85,000, $86,000 after touching, what was the most recent low? We're going to say about $76,000.
Correct.
Where are we going here? And how are you thinking about Bitcoin relative to gold in this particular moment?
Yeah, I think that's what everyone's really talking about right now. Bitcoin is down about 10% to start the year. Gold's up 20%. But if you look out over 1 year, they're both up about 35%. So it's pretty interesting that there's been this divergence. But if you go back and you take a look, you can actually see that gold usually leads these rallies. Okay. And nobody really knows why that happens. My kind of guess would be that a lot of the central banks and institutional investors, they're either not approved to buy Bitcoin or they're not used to running to Bitcoin in these moments of kind of geopolitical uncertainty. What we do see, though, is when gold runs about 100 days later or so, Bitcoin not only catches up, it usually runs much harder. And so you get that kind of higher volatility.
All eyes are on gold right now, and for good reason. Gold typically sniffs out unrest in the monetary system globally. Gold has historically been the asset that central banks, governments, and the old guard run to when there's times of uncertainty in markets. But the tide is shifting.
The vast majority of people who need to own Bitcoin don't yet own it at all. We need $1 trillion of buying into the Bitcoin market for institutions to just level up to a neutral portfolio. I think there's no way that happens without pushing Bitcoin's price up significantly. I'd also say, having watched various technologies over the past 20 or 30 years, everyone's always skeptical of the digital version of analog goods. But find me another industry where the digital version didn't just catch up, but eventually surpassed the physical good. It's happened in media, it's happened in advertising, it's happened in movies, it's happened in streaming. It's going to happen in store of value assets. So how long could it take? I think 5 or 10 years, right? Remember, 10 years ago, where was Bitcoin right now? It was 2014. It was trading for a few $100s. Today, we're talking about $100,000. It's not that hard to imagine that in 10 years, it's easily at $1 million or more. I think it'll happen by 2029.
Name one analog industry that's larger than their digital equivalent. As a millennial, I've seen them all fall down one by one. Corporations are starting to move to this trend first, as they can typically make decisions faster than governments or institutions. And according to this report from Bitwise, there are now 79 corporations that hold 688,000 Bitcoin, that increased 95,000 in the first quarter of this year. And I believe it's because they're all looking at a future that they believe is different from the past. But why aren't more doing it? Why don't more people see the same future that these 79 companies do? And it's because as humans, we are more prone to overestimate risk and underestimate opportunity.
I think it's generally human nature to overestimate risk and underestimate opportunity. And so I think entrepreneurs in general would be well advised to try and bias against that piece of human nature. The risks are probably not as big as you perceive, and the opportunities may be bigger than you perceive. The second thing I would point out is that, thinking small is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And this is sort of insane for me to be saying this, but even the US government sees Bitcoin as a once-in-a-generation opportunity. They're considering revaluing gold, using tariff revenue, and all sorts of means. They say any means possible to acquire as much Bitcoin as they can. Listen to this conversation between Anthony Pompliano and Executive Director of the Crypto Council, Bo Hines.
We obviously have made it very clear that we want to acquire as much as we can get. I've said that repeatedly throughout my time on the speaking circuit over the course of the last few months. And look, at the end of the day, it stipulates that we have to acquire Bitcoin in budget neutral ways that don't cost the taxpayer a dime. With that being said, I think that we have, as the president likes to say, many high IQ people working on these solutions, and we're going to have countless ideas on how we can accomplish this. And look, we have Secretary Ledn at Commerce, we have Secretary Bezos at the Treasury, many other great actors inside the interagency working group, and we'll come together and flesh out some of these ideas and really get to the best solution. But we're very confident that we can do so, and we'll start doing that in short order.
Now, these ideas of acquiring more Bitcoin, I know that none of them have been decided on, but there are many that I think are somewhat obvious of, hey, you could revalue gold, sell it, move things over to Bitcoin. But I think that people drastically are underestimating maybe net new ideas. And so as you guys have been brainstorming, are there themes to things that you guys are thinking about? And, there's one thing to take American taxpayer dollars that are already somewhere within the US government or on our balance sheet and kind of rearrange, right? Financial advisors all the time, they'll go and they'll rebalance their portfolio. That's kind of one whole theme. But then I've also seen Ledn and others talk about this idea of, well, maybe there's external revenue that we can drive and be able to use that. And so how are you guys maybe from a framework standpoint thinking about, okay, what are the ways that we could go buy more Bitcoin?
Well, I think that Senator Lummis has really an interesting idea with the Bitcoin Act of 2025, which I know has taken the community by storm. But here, what you would do is you'd revalue the gold certificates that we currently have at Treasury. Most of which are valued, I think, around like $43 an ounce, which is,
a lot lower than what it's really worth.
Correct. Yeah. So now we're sitting at $3,100 an ounce with being the price of gold. And if you took that value, what you could do is use that extra funding in order to buy more Bitcoin that could be used for the reserve. But that's just one idea. And, that's currently circulating its way through Capitol Hill, and we'll see how many co-sponsors she can get and how she can pull her colleagues on board. But we're looking at many creative ways, whether it be from, tariffs, whether it be from something else. I mean, there's literally countless ways in which you can do this. And, I'll defer to, some of our members inside of the interagency working group to see what ideas they come up with inside of their own shops. But we'll look at everything. Everything's on the table. And like we've said, we want as much as we can get. So we're going to make sure that no stone is unturned as we start fleshing out some of these processes.
If the United States government is taking the posture of never sell your Bitcoin, then I think that you should as well. But if you want to unlock liquidity in your Bitcoin without selling your Bitcoin, there hasn't been a lot of good and trusted ways to do this. And that's until Ledn came along in 2018. And since then, they've been the leader in Bitcoin-backed loans. They've issued over $9 billion worth of loans, and they have over 1,000 five-star customer reviews. That's because you can get liquidity in your account in less than 24 hours, at just 18 hours to be exact. The process is simple, easy, and transparent, and rates start at 12.4%, which is about half of a traditional credit card. Oh, and you don't have to make monthly payments, just a lump sum payment at the end of the term, which is spelled out clearly in the nice and beautiful dashboard that they offer you through the process. There's no surprises. Go to learn.ledn.io/borrow to get started on your Bitcoin-backed lending journey today. That's learn.ledn.io/borrow. One of the things that we preach constantly as you've been watching this show for a long time, hopefully, and subscribe to the channel, is that you need to take self-custody of your Bitcoin and stop relying on third-party exchanges and others to protect it for you. One of the ways that you can learn how to do this privately, properly, and securely is by getting a coach. And you can do that by working with the team at the Bitcoin Way. They will supply a member of their team to teach you how to remove your third-party keys from self-custody privately and securely so that you can protect your generational wealth, your Bitcoin, the right way. Go to thebitcoinway.com/simplybitcoin to get started today. That's thebitcoinway.com/simplybitcoin. You know who else is seeing the value of Bitcoin? Other countries. And it's reported that other countries like Russia and China are beginning to use Bitcoin as a means of settlement in their trade interactions. This is part of Matt Siegel's case for why he believes that Bitcoin will solve 5% of global transactions and be worth over $3 million over the next few decades.
And then over the longer term, we think there's a good chance that central banks and sovereign wealth funds will start to get more aggressive in adopting Bitcoin, not only as a store of value, but also as a medium exchange. So this year, the Czech Republic, the governor of the central bank there, has initiated a study to analyze Bitcoin for inclusion in their central bank reserves. And then just this week, Russia did a trade with China, partially denominated in Bitcoin, beginning to really use Bitcoin for the first time as a medium of exchange. And that's not for individuals buying coffee, that's for large-scale transactions where countries are using Bitcoin as an intermediary currency to do, say, an oil trade. And in that scenario where Bitcoin-denominated trade could be, say, 5% of global trade, we get to a $3 million price per Bitcoin. That's a long-term prediction, like 2050. But that's going to be necessary, we think, to elevate Bitcoin into the millions per coin.
If you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, we're not just looking at Bitcoin as a means of settlement, but as a significant portion of the global value of assets worldwide, which is about $900 trillion. But this $900 trillion has to be inflated and propped up by debt. And if that debt doesn't continue to expand, well, those assets collapse. And this is what drives Jeff Booth's thesis on Bitcoin being a $43 million asset.
What is the implied purchasing power of one Bitcoin in today's purchasing power terms against, say, today's balance sheet?
$43 million. Today's value. The global balance sheet has about $900 trillion of assets. I'm using asset value. It's not perfect because if people had the entire money in their house, right, the value in their house, they're spending like they have that. 21 million divided by 900 trillion. And you could actually probably divide it by 17 million instead of 21 million for lost coins. But and it would be a higher number. But so 43 million today's purchasing power. It's way more than that. By next month, the next month after, that 900 trillion won't be 900 trillion, and the debt underneath it won't be the debt underneath it. It'll expand greatly. If there's any sort of slowdown in debt coming in, an exponential rise of debt, then that 900 trillion will start collapsing. And as it starts to collapse, holding up the debt underneath it, the debt becomes insolvent and it collapses and every bank fails. So you know for sure the debt holding up that pyramid of assets, all of your assets are inside that debt. That debt's already insolvent. So that debt will expand. And that means, call it next year, instead of 900 trillion, it could be 1.1 quadrillion.
The oligarch can only see what is. They can't see the future. They can only seek more control. They don't see a future with freedom. And people want freedom. In an interview with my friend Brandon Gentile on Playable Characters with Samson Mow, he says that in the future, you won't want fiat, your boss won't want fiat, and your grocery store won't want fiat.
Eventually, people will demand to be paid in Bitcoin because their suppliers, like the grocery store or department store, whatever, will want Bitcoin too. So it's just like an amplification of demand from all parts of society that want Bitcoin. So eventually, you working for a company will have to ask the company, like, pay me in Bitcoin because I can't buy groceries with this paper anymore. But hyper-Bitcoinization depends on how you define it, but I define it as the point at which you no longer need to convert Bitcoin to fiat anymore. You can just live on a Bitcoin standard and earn sats and spend sats. But I believe it's coming faster than most people would expect because these types of changes in money, in the base money that everyone uses, are very quick changes. It's not a slow, gradual progression where in 2 years, maybe we'll be at 20%, and then another 2 years we'll be at 40%. It's quite exponential, because when most people stop wanting the fiat, then everyone stops wanting the fiat, because it's like a race against time to get rid of the fiat and get into something harder, which is Bitcoin.
The answer is simple. You want Bitcoin. You don't want your time, your talent, and your treasure devalued by governments and corporations that you didn't even elect. You want a money that can't be created out of thin air. You want the money of the future and not the money of the past. Not the analog version, not the credit-created version that can be printed ad infinitum like a video game. You want a hard money and a sound money that is ready for a digital future, and that's Bitcoin. If you want to continue to level up on your Bitcoin journey, your Bitcoin swag, your Bitcoin knowledge, or even grow your Bitcoin network, then the best place to do that is in Las Vegas from May 27th through May 29th at the Bitcoin Conference. They say there might be 20 to 30,000 people there this year. You're not going to want to miss the largest Bitcoin conference of the year. The Simply Bitcoin team will be there with our crew, with our team, with some merch. You aren't going to want to miss it. So go to b.tc/conference/2025 and use the promo code SIMPLY to get 10% off your tickets. Go to the Bitcoin Magazine conference website and look for the 2025 conference and use the promo code SIMPLY for 10% off. None of those price predictions or things that you saw today were my own. Those all came from different people who aren't talking, who aren't collaborating, who are just coming to the value of what they believe Bitcoin is worth on their own terms. And I believe that you should as well. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Happy stacking.